The high, lonesome whistle of the locomotive cut through the silence of the high plains, a shriek of iron and steam announcing its arrival. In the town of Clearwater, Wyoming territory, the sound meant mail, supplies, and the occasional new face. Today, it meant one new face. The train hissed to a stop, bleeding steam and cinders onto the raw timbers of the station platform. Men in dusty hats paused their work, leaning on freight wagons or spitting tobacco juice into the street, their eyes fixed on the passenger car. From it, a solitary figure emerged, blinking in the harsh, late-afternoon sun. Lila Mae Carter descended the steps as if stepping into a different, harder world. The wind immediately tugged at the dark brown wool of her traveling suit, a modest and well-worn garment that had been respectable in St. Louis, but looked thin and inadequate here. Her hat was pinned tightly, but stray wisps of brown hair escaped, clinging to her damp forehead. She was pale, her hands clenching the handle of a small, cracked reticule. Behind her, the conductor lowered her only possession, a single, battered trunk with leather straps that had seen too much weather. She stood frozen for a moment, her gaze sweeping over the town. It was not a town. Not really. It was a single, wide street of raw lumber and false-fronted buildings, bracketed by a livery, a saloon, and a general store. Beyond the last structure, the world fell away into an endless expanse of brown grass and distant, purple-shadowed buttes. It was a land that did not welcome, but merely endured. Her anxiety was a living thing, tightening her throat. She searched the platform, her eyes desperate. She was looking for Mr. Jonathan Pike, the man who had paid her passage, the man whose letters, brief, practical, and devoid of affection, were tucked inside her boot. A man stepped forward, separating himself from the shadows of the station overhang. He was not what she had expected. Jonathan Pike was a man of substance, and he wore it like armor. He was tall, his shoulders broad under a fine, black broadcloth coat. His boots were polished to a high sheen, and a gold watch chain was strung across his waistcoat. He was handsome, in a severe, sharp-edged way, with eyes the color of a winter sky. He did not approach her. He waited for her to approach him. Lila swallowed the dust and fear in her throat, picked up her reticule, and walked toward him, her steps hesitant on the rough planking. The heavy trunk remained where the conductor had left it. "Mr. Pike," she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper, stolen by the wind. He looked her up and down. It was not a greeting. It was an appraisal, the kind a man gives a horse he is considering buying, and finding wanting. His nostrils flared, just slightly. "You are Miss Carter," he stated. It was not a question. "Yes, sir, I am. I thank you for the passage. The journey was—" "You are smaller than I pictured," he cut in, his voice as flat and cold as a river stone. His gaze lingered on her face, noting the tiredness under her eyes, the faint scar on her chin she always tried to hide with powder. Lila's cheeks burned. "I am told I am a hard worker, sir. I am quick to learn, and I am not afraid of—" "Be silent," he said. She stopped, the words dying in her throat. The humiliation was instant and scalding, like hot water poured on her skin. Pike looked at her for another long, agonizing moment. He seemed disgusted, not with anger, but with a deep, profound disappointment. He had ordered one thing and received another. "Your letters," he said. His voice clipped, suggested a woman of constitution, of some refinement. I am refined," she whispered, knowing as she said it how flimsy she must look, how weary and wind-scoured. "You are plain," he said, not cruelly, but as a simple statement of fact. "And you are frightened." "I have no use for a frightened woman. This land eats the frightened." He turned his head and looked down the street, toward the squat building marked Harker's Mercantile. "I require a wife who can manage a household, host dignitaries from the East, and reflect my station. You look as though you would be startled by a closing door." "I would not, sir," she said, desperation making her voice shake. "I am strong. Please, just give me— I have changed my mind." The words hung in the dusty air. They seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the station. The few men lingering had drawn closer. Not to help, to listen. "Changed your mind," she repeated, the sound hollow. "I will not be taking you," Pike said. He reached into his waistcoat pocket and retrieved a small, leather purse. He opened it, extracted $2 silver, and pressed them into her hand. Her fingers were so cold. She barely felt the metal. "That is for your trouble," he said. "I consider the price of your passage forfeit. A poor investment on my part." He motioned with his chin toward her trunk. "Harker, at the Mercantile. Can hold your trunk until the next train passes through. It returns east on Friday. That is in 3 days. I suggest you be on it. This is no place for you." He turned, adjusting the lapels of his coat, and began to walk away. "But where will I stay?" she cried out. The sound ripped from her. "What am I to do for 3 days? I have nothing." Jonathan Pike paused. He looked back over his shoulder, his face impassive. "That is not my concern. I have found you unsuitable." He did not walk her to the general store. He simply left her. He strode to a fine, black buggy hitched near the livery, climbed in, and with a sharp snap of the reins, was gone in a cloud of alkali dust. Lila Mae Carter stood alone. The silver dollars felt heavy in her palm, an anchor of shame. She was speechless, humiliated, and utterly marooned. The silence that followed Pike's departure was broken by a low chuckle from 2 cowboys leaning against the saloon wall. One of them nudged the other. "Well, I'll be Pike sure is particular about his mail order stock." "Hush, boys," a woman's voice snapped. "Mrs. Harker," a woman built like a flour sack, stood on the porch of the Mercantile, her arms crossed, but her eyes, when they met Lila's, held no pity. They held only weary judgment. The townsfolk stared. They did not mock. Not all of them, but they stared. They stared at this new, broken piece of driftwood washed up on their shore. She was a curiosity, a scandal that had lasted less than 5 minutes. They looked, and then, one by one, they looked away. They went back to their business, leaving her to stand in the cooling air with her trunk and her $2. None helped. None offered a word. From across the street, sitting on the seat of a battered freight wagon, Eli Thatcher watched the entire thing. He had been in town for supplies, a monthly ritual he endured rather than enjoyed. His wagon was loaded with 2 sacks of flour, a heavy bag of coffee beans, salt, and a small keg of nails. He was a solitary man, carved from the same hard material as the land he worked. His face was weathered from the sun, his eyes quiet and watchful. He lived on a small homestead out on the edge of the flats, a place he'd built with his own hands, and he kept to himself. He knew Jonathan Pike. Everyone knew Pike. Pike owned the Circle P, the biggest ranch in the valley, and he ran it with the same cold efficiency he had just used to dismiss a human life. Eli had seen Pike's arrogance before, seen him ride roughshod over smaller homesteaders, divert water, and bend the law to his will. Eli watched the woman. She had not moved. She stood like a statue, her back rigid, her head bowed. The sun was beginning to dip, painting the clouds in violent strokes of orange and red, and the air was growing teeth. A prairie night came on fast and cold. He cursed under his breath. It was not his business. He had his own ghosts, his own reasons for seeking solitude. Bringing that woman home was bringing trouble. Pike would not like it. The town would talk, and Eli hated talk. He finished tying the canvas cover over his supplies, his movements deliberate. He climbed onto the wagon seat, took up the reins, and clicked his tongue. The mules strained, and the wagon creaked into the main street. He drove past the saloon. He drove past the Mercantile, and he saw her. She was still there. She had not cried. She seemed to have shrunk into herself, bracing against the wind that was now carrying the first real chill of evening. She looked up as his wagon passed, her eyes wide and haunted, like a deer caught in a trap. Eli pulled the mules to a halt. The wagon was silent, save for the jingle of the harness. He stared at the horizon for a long moment, At the coming darkness, he was wrestling with himself. It was a fool's errand. He was a fool. He wrapped the reins and climbed down from the wagon. His boots made a hollow sound on the boardwalk. He was not a large man, not like Pike, but he was solid. He stopped a few feet from her, careful not to crowd her. He pulled his hat brim lower, hiding his eyes. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel, unused to polite conversation. Lila flinched, pulling her threadbare coat tighter. She looked at his worn boots, his canvas trousers, his scarred hands. She expected another insult, another jeer. "Heard what he said," Eli continued, gesturing with his head toward the road Pike had taken. "Heard him tell you to be on the Friday train." Lila nodded, unable to speak. Her throat was locked tight with shame. "Friday's 3 days off," Eli said, stating the fact. He looked at the sky. "Night'll be here in an hour. It'll drop 20 degrees when the sun's gone." He paused, clearly uncomfortable. He was not a man for speeches. "You can't stay here." Lila finally looked up, her eyes meeting his. I have $2. Sir, perhaps the hotel." Eli gave a short, harsh laugh. "The hotel is the top floor of that saloon. It ain't for ladies. And even if it was, Silas, the man who runs it, is Pike's man. He won't give you a room." He looked back at Mrs. Harker, who was now pointedly sweeping the porch, her back to them. "And Mrs. Harker won't take you in." The last sliver of hope in Lila's chest died. She was truly trapped. Eli shifted his weight, rubbing the back of his neck. He was angry. Angry at Pike for his cruelty. Angry at the town for its cowardice. And mostly angry at himself for what he was about to do. "I live out east," he said, nodding toward the empty plains. "Got a small homestead. It's not much, but it's warm." Lila stared at him, confused. "I got a spare room," he mumbled, kicking at a loose board. "It's just a cot, but it's clean." Her mind raced. He was a stranger. A rough man in a rough land. Her upbringing, what little of it was left, screamed at her to refuse. But her reality was colder. The sun was gone, and the shadows were turning blue. "I am offering you shelter, ma'am," Eli said, his voice firming up, as if he'd finally settled the argument with himself. "Just temporary. You can figure out your next move from there. Come Friday. I'll bring you back for the train, if that's your choice." "Why?" she whispered, the question torn from her. "Why would you help me?" Eli looked at her then, his eyes clear and steady. They were a deep gray, and they held no malice, only a profound, weary sadness. "Because I saw what he did," Eli said, "and it wasn't right, that's all." He turned to her trunk. "This all you got?" She nodded. He grunted, bent down, and lifted the trunk with an ease that surprised her. It must have weighed 100 pounds. He carried it to the back of his wagon and heaved it in among the sacks of flour. He walked back to her. "It's a long ride, an hour, maybe more." Lila looked at the silver dollars in her hand. They felt dirty. She looked at this stranger, who had offered her a roof when the whole town had offered her nothing. She was ashamed, but she had no choice, and a flicker of something she had not felt in a long time, defiance, stirred in her. She closed her hand around the coins. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice small but clear. Eli nodded, avoiding her eyes again. "Wagons this way." He helped her up onto the hard wooden seat, his hand briefly touching her elbow. His grip was rough but impersonal. He climbed up beside her, unwrapped the reins, and with a soft, "Yeah," the wagon lurched into motion. As they rolled out of Clearwater, no one waved. No one watched, except from behind curtained windows. Lila did not look back. The journey was silent. The only sounds were the rattle of the wagon wheels on the hard-packed earth, the creak of the leather harness, and the constant sighing moan of the wind carving its way through the plains. The landscape was brutal and vast, a sea of darkening grass under a sky so big it threatened to swallow them. Eli Thatcher did not speak. He kept his eyes on the mules, his shoulders set against the chill. Lila sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her body rigid with a mixture of fear and exhaustion. She did not know if she had escaped one trap only to fall into another. This man was a mystery. He was kind, or he was pretending to be. He was respectful, or he was patient. She had learned long ago that men were rarely what they seemed, but as the miles passed, and he made no move to speak to her, or even look at her, a small part of her tension began to ease. He was not Pike. He did not carry himself with that air of ownership. He seemed as solitary as she felt. They arrived at his homestead just as the last light bled from the sky. It was not a ranch. Not really. It was a cabin. Small but sturdy, built of hand-hewn cottonwood logs. A small, solid-looking barn stood nearby, along with a chicken coop and a well-fenced corral. It was a place built for survival, not comfort. It was the home of a man who expected nothing from the world but what he could take with his own 2 hands. Eli halted the mules and set the brake. "We're here." He got down and came around to her side. He offered his hand. She hesitated, then placed her gloved fingers in his. He helped her down, his grip strong, and released her immediately. "I'll tend the mules," he said. "Cabin's unlocked. Stove is in the corner. There's coffee in the tin by the sink." He led the mules toward the barn without another word. Lila stood for a moment, the trunk at her feet, and looked at the cabin. It was small, dark, and perched on the edge of nowhere. She was miles from any town, alone with a man she did not know. But the wind was sharp, and the smell of wood smoke from the chimney promised warmth. She took a breath, grabbed her reticule, and went inside. The interior was sparse but clean, a single room, divided by function. A cast-iron stove in one corner, a dry sink and shelves in another. A table with 2 chairs sat in the middle. In the far back was a simple bed, neatly made, against the opposite wall. A rifle rack held 2 long guns. The air smelled of wood smoke, old coffee, and leather. A narrow doorway led to a small, add-on room. She peered inside. It was small, barely larger than a closet, containing a narrow cot, a small, 3-legged stool, and a single window. When Eli entered 10 minutes later, stamping the cold from his boots, he found her standing by the stove, her coat still on. "That's your room," he said, gesturing to the small space. "It was meant for, well, it's just storage now. But the cot is clean. Thank you, Mr. Thatcher." "Just Eli," he said, not looking at her. He moved to the stove and shook the coffee pot. "I was about to make supper. It ain't much, beans and bacon." "I can help," she offered, taking a step forward. "No need. You sit." He pointed to the table. They ate in an awkward, humming silence. The beans were hot, the bacon salty, and the coffee black and bitter. Lila was so hungry. She ate every bite, though she felt his eyes on her when he thought she wasn't looking. The air was thick with unspoken questions, with the strangeness of their situation. When they were done, he took her plate. "The well is out back for water. Outhouse is north of the well. There's a bolt on the inside of your door. I suggest you use it." The implication hung in the air. Use it against the outside world, or against him? "Thank you, Eli," she said, her voice trembling slightly. You have been very kind," he grunted, turning to the sink. "Kindness ain't got much to do with it. Ma'am, just ain't right. What he did, get some rest." Lila retreated to the small room. She closed the door, and her fingers found the simple wooden bolt. She slid it into place. The sound was loud in the quiet cabin. She sat on the cot, which creaked under her weight. She was safe, for now, but she was still a prisoner. That night, neither of them slept, in her small, dark room. Lila lay rigid on the cot, still in her clothes. The walls were thin. She could hear every sound, the scrape of his boots on the floor, the pop and crackle of the stove as he added another log, the sigh of the wind as it clawed at the corners of the cabin. She was haunted by the strangeness of it all. Hours ago, she had been a prospective bride. Now she was, what, charity? A burden? She thought of Pike's cold eyes, his voice dismissing her. Unsuitable. She pushed herself off the cot and went to her trunk, which Eli had brought in and left at the foot of her bed. She opened it. The smell of lavender and old paper rose from its contents. She pushed aside her few spare dresses, her brushes, and her sewing kit. From the false bottom, she retrieved a small, calfskin-bound book and a bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. She took one letter from the bundle. It was stained with tears. The ink blurred in places. She did not read it. She knew the words by heart. She held it to her chest for a moment, her knuckles white. Then, carefully, she placed it and the book back in the trunk and secured the bottom. She did not cry. Her eyes were dry and hot. She went to the small window and pushed aside the rough-spun curtain. The sky was a spray of white, brilliant stars, more than she had ever seen. They looked cold and terribly far away. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and whispered to the darkness, to the empty land, to herself, "I'm not going back." In the main room, Eli sat at the table, the fire dying in the hearth. The cabin was still, but he was wide awake. He could feel her presence on the other side of that door, a small, terrified thing he had dragged into his quiet life. He thought of Pike, sleeping in his large, empty house. He thought of the town, turning a blind eye. He rose, went to a locked cabinet, and took out a bottle of whiskey and a single glass. He poured 2 fingers and sat down by the dying embers. He was drawn by curiosity, yes, but also by a deep, resonant guilt. He knew what loneliness was. He knew what it was to be judged. He drank the whiskey in one long pull, the burn familiar and sharp. He stared into the glowing coals, his face a mask of old sorrows. "Ain't right," he muttered to the empty room, the words swallowed by the shadows. "Ain't right. What he did to her." The first dawn on the homestead was a shock of cold and quiet. Lila woke on the narrow cot to a silence she had never known, a stillness so deep it felt like the world had forgotten her. She bolted her door, but the cabin was already empty. Through the small window, she saw Eli in the corral, his breath a white plume as he saddled his horse. She rose, her body aching from the wagon ride and the unyielding cot. Her hands, soft from factory work, felt useless. She knew, with a certainty that settled in her stomach like a stone, that she could not be a guest. Charity was a bitter-tasting bread, and she had eaten her fill of it. When Eli returned 2 hours later, chilled by the morning air, he found the fire in the stove roaring, a pot of coffee brewing, and Lila, her face smudged with soot, wrestling with a heavy cast-iron skillet. She had found his meager supply of bacon and flour and was attempting to make flapjacks. They were thick, slightly burned, and the best thing he had tasted in a year. They ate at the table, the silence stretching between them. "The chickens," she said, her voice small. "I heard them. I can feed them, if you tell me what." Eli looked at her. Her dark traveling suit was already impractical. He finished his coffee and stood. "I'll show you." And so, life on the ranch began. It was a life of hard, grinding repetition. Her world shrank to the cabin, the chicken coop, the woodpile, and the well. The well was her greatest enemy. Hauling the bucket up hand over hand left her palms raw. The first time she tried to carry 2 full pails from the well to the cabin. She slipped in the mud, soaking her skirt and losing every drop. She sat in the muck, her hands bleeding from the rope, and wept. Not from the pain, but from the humiliation of her own weakness. She did not cry for long. She went back to the well, drew another bucket, and carried it, one at a time, until the cabin's water barrel was full. Her hands blistered. The blisters broke, bled, and began to form calluses. She learned to scatter feed for the half-wild chickens, to find their hidden nests, to churn the cream from their one milk cow into a passable, pale butter. She scrubbed Eli's floor. She mended his worn shirts, her stitches small and neat, a skill from a different life. She cooked, and the food she made was simple but filling. Eli watched her, He was a man who had lived by himself for so long. The presence of another human was like a stone in his boot. He'd expected her to be fragile, to break, to wait by the window for the Friday train. He was surprised by her strength. It was not the strength of a mule, but the strength of wire. She was thin, but she did not bend. She worked from sunup until she could barely stand, and she never once complained. She was quiet, and he was quieter. They shared brief, silent meals. The cabin was too small for distance. He could smell the faint, clean scent of lye soap when she washed. She could hear him breathe in the night. They stole glances when the other was not looking. He would look up from his plate and find her staring at the fire, her face drawn and sad. She would look up from her mending and find him watching her, his gray eyes unreadable, before he would clear his throat and look away. One evening, as she was washing the dishes and he was oiling a piece of harness, the quiet felt different. It was less awkward, more settled. "You're quick with a needle," he said, his voice startling her. She paused, her hands in the warm, soapy water. "I worked in a textile factory in St. Louis." He nodded, waiting for more. "For 6 years," she offered, wiping her hands on an apron she had fashioned from a flour sack. "On the looms. It was loud." "Why'd you leave?" he asked, his voice low. Lila turned her back to him, pretending to scrub a pot. The real answer was a knot of shame in her throat. The factory owner's son, the unwanted attentions, the lies they told when she refused, the loss of her job and her lodgings in the same terrible week. The mail-order advertisement had been an act of pure desperation. "The work was hard," she said, the half-truth tasting like ash. "And there was no family to keep me there?" She did not speak of her father. She never spoke of her family. Eli seemed to understand her evasion. He did not press. Instead, he offered a piece of himself. A trade. "My folks are gone," he said to the piece of leather in his hands. "Had a younger brother, Silas. He was loud." Eli almost smiled at the memory. "Full of fire. He loved this land. Wanted all of it." "Where is he?" she asked, turning. Eli's hands stilled. "He died 5 years ago. In a range war just south of here. Fought over a patch of grass and a trickle of water. He was 20. The quiet that filled the cabin after that was heavy with the ghosts of people they had both lost. The next day, he was fixing a stretch of fence near the corral, a post split by the last hard frost. Lila came out, her thin coat wrapped tight, carrying a cup of hot coffee. "I can help," she said. He grunted. "This ain't mending, ma'am. I can hold the post straight," she insisted. "While you tamp the earth?" He looked at her, at the fierce set of her jaw, and nodded. "All right, but it's heavy." He dug out the old post and set a new one, cut from juniper. "Hold it steady," he commanded. She wrapped her arms around the rough-hewn wood, trying to hold it perpendicular to the earth. It was heavy, and it wobbled. "You ain't tall enough to get a good hold," he said, frustrated, but not at her. "At the situation, you'll need to climb the first rail, brace it with your hip." She looked at the fence rail. It was a high step. She put her foot up, but her skirts were too tight, her reach too short. Before she could protest, Eli moved behind her. "Here," he said. He put his hands on her waist. Lila froze. His hands were huge, rough, calloused, and hot. Even in the chill air, they spanned her waist, his thumbs pressing just below her ribs, his fingers splayed wide. It was not a gentle or romantic touch. It was a practical one. He lifted her as easily as he would a sack of grain, setting her on the bottom rail. But the moment his hands closed around her, a jolt went through them both, sharp and sudden as a spark from a flint. They both stopped breathing. He was behind her, his body close. She could feel the heat of his chest against her back. He could smell the soap in her hair. She was so small, so rigid. He could feel the fine tremor running through her. The wind whipped a strand of her hair across his face. He let go as if his hands had been burned. He stepped back, too quickly. Lila stumbled on the rail, clinging to the post. I have it," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "Right," Eli said, his own voice thick. He grabbed the tamping rod and began to work, slamming the dirt into the hole with a violence that was unnecessary. Neither of them spoke of it, but the air between them had changed. It was no longer empty. It was filled with a new, dangerous awareness. A week later, the sky turned a sickening shade of green. Eli, who had been watching the horizon all afternoon, came in from the barn. "Storm's coming," he said, his voice flat. "A bad one. Make sure the shutters are latched tight." The wind hit the cabin an hour after sunset. It did not blow, it screamed. It was a living, malicious thing that threw itself against the small building, searching for a way in. Rain and hail hammered the roof like buckshot. The cabin, which had felt sturdy, now seemed like a tiny, fragile box in a vast, angry ocean. Eli sat at the table, cleaning his rifle, an oddly calming, repetitive motion. Lila sat on her cot, the door to her room wide open. In this weather, a closed door felt like a coffin. She was trying to read a worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress, but the words blurred. The thunder was not a rumble. It was a cannonade, a crack of celestial artillery that shook the very ground. With each flash of lightning, the small room was lit in a stark, terrifying white, followed by an immediate, oppressive darkness. Lila was pale, her hands clenched in her lap, but she said nothing. Sometime after midnight, the storm found its peak. A bolt of lightning struck something nearby, a tree, or the earth itself, with a sound that was not a sound, but a physical blow. The world split open with white light and a deafening crack that vibrated in their bones. Lila screamed. It was not a small cry of fright. It was a raw, terrified shriek, torn from the deepest part of her. She scrambled off the cot, her eyes wide and blind with terror, and huddled in the corner of her room, her hands over her head. "It's just the storm, ma'am," Eli said, rising. But she was not listening. She was gasping, hyperventilating, her body shaking in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. She was trapped in a memory. "Lila," Eli said, his voice sharper. He moved to her doorway. She was rocking, her knuckles white. He lit the lantern on the table, and the small, steady flame pushed back the shadows. He approached her, slow, as he would a spooked mare. "Lila May," he said, his voice dropping, becoming softer. He knelt, not too close, and set the lantern on the floor. "It's just lightning. It's past. You're safe." "No," she gasped, the words strangled. "No, please, no, I can't breathe. He's holding me under. It's so cold." Eli's blood ran cold. He was not in the cabin anymore. He was in her memory. "There's no one here," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "It's just me, Eli. There's no water. You're on the floor. You're dry. You're in Wyoming. You are safe." He repeated it, over and over, his voice a lifeline in the dark. Slowly, the terrible, frantic rhythm of her breathing began to slow. Her eyes focused, first on the lantern, then on his face. She looked at him, confused, and then the confusion gave way to a wave of crushing, terrible shame. She had exposed herself. She collapsed into sobs, not loud, but a racking, agonizing weeping that shook her whole body. "I'm sorry," she choked, hiding her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean—" "Don't," he said. He sat back on his heels, giving her space, but he did not leave. He waited, when she could finally speak. The words came out broken. "A man, in St. Louis, before the factory, he said I was his. He held me under the water, in the river. He said he would wash me clean." She was not looking at him. She was looking at the floorboards, at the past. "I got away, but I feel like I never did." She was shaking again. "I feel dirty, all the time. I feel used up." The last words were almost inaudible, a confession of her deepest, most guarded secret. Eli Thatcher was a simple man. He knew the land, he knew horses, and he knew his own grief. He did not know what to say to this, but he knew what was right. He was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the howl of the wind and her ragged breathing. "No man has the right to say that about you," he said finally, his voice rough with an anger that was not directed at her. No man has the right to put his hands on you in anger, and no man, no matter what he did, has the right to make you feel dirty. That ain't on you, Lila. That's on him. She looked up at him, her eyes wide, tears tracking through the soot on her face. No one had ever said that to her. No one had ever taken her side. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand finding his. Her fingers were ice cold. His hand was rough and hot. It was a drowning woman's grip. He froze. He did not pull away. He did not grip her hand back. He simply let her hold on, his hand a solid, warm anchor in the storm. The air in the cabin grew thick, charged with something more than just the lightning. It was the touch of two lonely, broken people. He could feel her pulse, frantic and small, against his palm. He looked at her mouth, parted, her face stained with tears. She felt it, too. The shift, the heat, the possibility, and it terrified her. Lila snatched her hand back as if she'd touched a hot stove. She pulled her knees to her chest, hiding herself again. I'm sorry. I'm tired. Eli stood, his own hand tingling. Yeah, get some rest. He picked up the lantern and walked back to the table. He did not go to bed. He sat there until the storm passed and the first gray light of dawn appeared. And she sat on her cot, her back against the wall, until the same light told her it was safe to move. A few days later, the Friday train came and went. Lila did not go back to town. Eli did not mention it, but he had to go. Supplies were low, and the storm had loosened some shingles. He needed roofing nails. He rode into Clearwater alone. The town was the same, but Eli was different. He felt proprietary. He felt angry. He was in Harker's Mercantile, his purchases being wrapped. When Jonathan Pike walked in, Pike looked at Eli, his eyes cold. He didn't just own the valley. He owned the air in it. Thatcher, Pike said, a dismissal in the single word. He turned to Mr. Harker. I need a case of your best brandy. Afternoon, Pike, Eli said, his voice flat. Pike turned, surprised Eli had spoken. I hear, Pike said, his voice loud enough for the other two customers to hear, that you've taken in my refuse. Eli's hand, which was in his pocket, closed into a fist. I don't know what you're talking about. The mail order, Pike said, smiling a thin, cruel smile. The one I sent back. I hear she's squatting on your homestead. Must be desperate for company. Thatcher, to take in a woman like that. What kind of woman is that? Pike, Eli asked, his voice dangerously low. A whore, Pike said, spitting the word. A con artist. Wrote me letters pretending to be a lady. When I saw her, I knew the truth. She's a common, used-up whore who thought she could trick me into a marriage. The lie was so blatant, so cruel, it sucked the air from the room. You'd know, Eli said, stepping forward. She's probably charging you for her keep. Pike sneered. Eli hit him. It was not a long, drawn-out fight. It was a single, brutal punch. Eli's fist, hardened by years of tamping posts and hauling rock, connected with Pike's jaw with a sound like a dry branch snapping. Pike went down, crashing into a barrel of crackers. The store was silent. Pike lay on the floor, stunned, his mouth bleeding. Eli stood over him, breathing hard. You ever speak her name again, Eli said, and I'll finish what I started. You stay away from her. You stay away from me. He threw his money on the counter, grabbed his package, and walked out. He rode home, the fury still burning in him. By the time he reached the homestead, his anger had cooled into a hard, cold dread. He had just punched the most powerful man in the valley. He found Lila scattering chicken feed. She smiled when she saw him, a small, hesitant smile that was still new. Don't go into town, he said, swinging down from his horse. His voice was harsh. Her smile vanished. What? Why? Just don't go. Not alone. Not at all. If you can help it. What happened? Eli? You're bleeding. She pointed to his knuckles, which were split and raw. I had a disagreement with Pike. About me, she whispered, her face going pale. She knew, of course she knew. What did he say? What are they saying? It doesn't matter. It does, she cried, her voice rising. It's my shame. Eli, not yours. You don't have to fight for me. He called you. Eli stopped. He couldn't repeat the word. A whore? She finished for him, her voice flat. Dead. Or a harlot, or just used goods. I am used to people looking at me with disgust. Eli. Eli grabbed her arm. Not hard, but enough to make her look at him. His gray eyes were on fire. I never have, he said, his voice low and fierce. Not once. I ain't them, and I ain't him. I don't look at you and see disgust. I just see you. He let go of her arm, the place where his fingers had been burned. He turned and stalked to the barn, leaving her standing by the chickens, her world tilting on its axis. That night, the silence was unbearable. It was not the peaceful quiet of two people comfortable in their solitude. It was the charged, humming silence of a lightning strike about to happen. After their silent supper, Lila went outside. The air was cool, and the sky was full of stars. She could not stay in the cabin. She could not breathe. She heard the thwack of an axe biting into wood. She walked around the side of the cabin. Eli was at the wood pile. He had taken off his shirt, despite the chill. His undershirt was damp with sweat, clinging to the broad muscles of his back and arms. He was chopping wood with a furious, desperate energy, as if trying to split his own anger in two. He would raise the axe, the muscles in his back tensing, his arms taut. He would hold it there for a moment, a perfect silhouette against the deepening twilight, and then bring it down with a grunt, the wood exploding. Lila watched him. She watched the sweat glisten on his arms in the faint light from the cabin window. She watched the power in his shoulders, the way he moved, the coiled energy. This was the man who had hit Jonathan Pike for her. This was the man who had told her she was not dirty. This was the man who had seen her at her lowest and had not turned away. He felt her gaze. He stopped, the axe buried in the chopping block. He didn't turn around. Not at first. He just stood, breathing hard, the steam rising from his shoulders. Then, slowly, he turned. He saw her standing in the shadows, a pale figure against the dark. Her hair was down, loose around her shoulders. He caught her gaze, and she did not look away. The silence of the high prairie rushed in. There was no wind. The only sounds were his breathing and the frantic, sudden hammering of her heart. It was a moment stretched impossibly thin. It was pure silence. It was pure heat. He took a half-step toward her. Lila flinched and pulled her shawl tighter. She turned and fled back into the cabin, into the safety of her small room. She slid the bolt. Eli stood for a long time by the wood pile. He raised the axe and brought it down, again and again, long after the wood was split, until he was exhausted and the night was fully dark. That night, they slept in their separate rooms. The bolt was shot on her door. His rifle was on the wall. Neither of them slept soundly. Neither of them slept at all. They lay awake, haunted, listening to the quiet breathing of the person on the other side of the thin, wooden wall. The silence in the cabin had become a heavy, suffocating thing. It had been days since Eli had hit Pike, days since he had stood in the starlight and watched Lila watch him, and the air between them was so thick with unspoken words it was a wonder they could breathe. They moved around each other like ghosts, polite, distant, and trapped. Lila could not bear it. She was a burden. She ate his food, slept under his roof, and in return, she had brought him nothing but trouble, a fight with the most powerful man in the valley, and a new, tense awkwardness. She had to do something. She had to earn her keep, or she would waste away, not from hunger, but from the slow erosion of her own worth. She had a skill. It was a simple, domestic skill, but it was hers. She knew how to bake. She waited until Eli rode out early one morning, his rifle in its scabbard, to check his traps on the far side of the ridge. He would be gone. He'd said, until well after noon. The moment his horse was a speck on the horizon, she went to work. She took inventory. His flour bin was low, the sugar nearly gone, But there was a large sack of dried apples, a few tins of peaches, cinnamon, and, blessedly, a large tub of lard. It was enough. She worked with a frantic energy. She built up the fire, hauled the water, and mixed the dough. Her hands, now calloused and strong, worked the pastry. The cabin filled, for the first time, with a scent that was not of wood smoke or coffee, but of home, of cinnamon and apples and warm, baking bread. She felt a flicker of pride, a sensation so foreign it almost made her weep. By mid-morning, 6 perfect golden brown pies sat cooling on the table. 4 apple, 2 peach. They were beautiful. She knew what he had said. Don't go into town, not alone. His warning had been born of fury, and she knew, of fear. But the alternative, this slow, silent dependence, was a different kind of prison. She would not be hidden. She would not be ashamed. She loaded the pies into a wooden crate. She found a piece of charcoal and a scrap of board and wrote, in neat, careful letters, "Fresh pies, 10 cents." She harnessed the mules to the wagon, a task that took her 3 tries, and her hands were shaking. But she did it. She drove the wagon toward Clearwater, her back straight, her heart a cold, hard knot in her chest. The town was quiet. It was that lull in the middle of the day. She hitched the mules outside Harker's Mercantile, the very spot where Pike had abandoned her. The irony was not lost on her. She lowered the tailgate, set out her pies, and placed her sign, Mrs. Harker came out onto the porch, saw her, sniffed, and went back inside. Lila stood by the wagon. She felt the stares. Men paused on their way to the saloon. Women on the boardwalk crossed the street to avoid her. She was the outcast, Pike's leavings, Thatcher's whore. Then 2 men sauntered over. They were not from the town. They wore the colors of the Circle P. Pike's ranch. They were the same 2 who had been on the platform that first day. "Well, looky here, Jeb," the taller one said, a lazy drawl to his voice. He had a mean, thin mouth. "It's the mail-order bride, back in business." "Pies," the one called Jeb said, reading the sign with exaggerated difficulty. 10 cents. He looked at Lila, his eyes traveling over her body in a way that made her skin crawl. "Seems mighty cheap. What else you sellin'? Girly?" Lila's hands clenched. "The pies are 10 cents. Sir, if you don't want one, please move along." "Oh, she's feisty," the tall one chuckled. He reached out and snagged a piece of crust from one of the apple pies. Stale. "That's for paying customers," Lila said, her voice shaking. Jeb leaned in close, his breath a foul wave of tobacco and whiskey. "I ain't talking about the pie. Pike said you was used goods. Maybe we'd like a sample of what Thatcher's been enjoying." He reached out, his hand closing around her wrist. Lila gasped, pulling back, but his grip was like an iron band. "Let go of me. That's enough. Jeb." The voice was a woman's, sharp and strong as an axe handle. A woman in a faded, gray calico dress stepped off the boardwalk. She was stout, plain-faced, with kind eyes that were currently full of fire. She carried a basket full of eggs. Jeb did not release Lila, but he looked at the woman. "Mind your own, Agnes. This ain't your concern." "This young woman is trying to conduct business," Agnes said, planting herself between the cowboy and Lila. "You are harassing her. Now, you can either buy a pie or you can explain to Sheriff Brody why I'm about to scream my head off. Your choice." The tall one laughed. "You ain't got the sand. Old woman." "Try me," Agnes said, her hand tightening on her basket. "I've put down rabid dogs before. You 2 are just noisier." Jeb looked from Agnes to the sheriff's office, where the curtain had twitched. He sneered, but he let go of Lila's wrist. He pushed her, not hard, but enough to make her stumble back. "Whatever, she's probably poisoned him anyway." The 2 men laughed and swaggered into the saloon. Lila was breathing hard, rubbing the red mark on her wrist. "You all right, dear?" Agnes asked, her voice softening. Lila nodded, unable to speak. "My name is Agnes Miller," the woman said. "My farm is 2 miles south. I saw what Pike did to you that day. What those men did now. It ain't right. She looked at the pies. Those look fine. I'll take 2 of the apple. My boy loves apple. She paid Lila 20 cents. Hard coin. You have grit, child. Don't let these coyotes chase you off. Agnes had just turned to leave when a horse thundered down the street, kicking up a cloud of dust. It was Eli, on his bay stallion. He had seen the wagon gone. Must have ridden straight in. He was not wearing a hat, and his face was a mask of pure, cold fury. He pulled the horse up so hard it reared slightly. He was off before its hooves touched the ground. He didn't look at Agnes, didn't look at the men in the saloon. He looked at Lila. Get in the wagon, now, he said. His voice was not loud. It was worse. It was quiet and full of something lethal. Lila flinched. Eli, I said, now. From the saloon porch, Jeb, who had come out to watch, called out, Hey, Thatcher, looks like your property got loose. You best keep her on a shorter rope. Eli went rigid. He turned, very slowly, toward the saloon. Eli, no, Lila whispered. Hey, Thatcher, Jeb called again. Bolder. She charging you, or you getting a family discount? Eli started walking toward him. Eli, please, let's just go home, Lila pleaded, grabbing his arm. He shook her off, not gently. He stepped onto the porch. You say her name again. Jeb, bolstered by his friend, stood up. He was taller than Eli, but softer. What's the matter? Farmer? Can't handle a little truth? He shoved Eli in the chest. It was the wrong thing to do. It was. Lila saw. The very thing Eli had been running from. Eli didn't punch him. He moved, a blur of motion, grabbing the front of Jeb's shirt and slamming him back against the saloon wall. The wood cracked. I'm trying to live quiet, Eli roared, his face inches from the man's. The other cowboy, the tall one, lunged. He swung a fist, aiming for Eli's head. Eli turned, letting Jeb go, and the man's fist glanced off his cheek, a sharp, scraping blow. Eli ignored it. He hit the tall man once, in the gut, a short, brutal punch. The man folded, gasping. Jeb, free, scrambled for the door. Eli stood on the porch, his chest heaving. The entire street had gone silent. He was breathing like a winded bull, his eyes wild. He looked at the man on the ground. He looked at his own fist, and a terrible, sick look of self-loathing washed over his face. He turned, jumped off the porch, and stalked to the wagon. He didn't look at Lila. He just grabbed her by the arm and lifted her onto the seat. He unhitched his horse, tied it to the back, and took the reins. The wagon lurched forward, leaving 4 pies, the crate, and the handwritten sign in the dust. The ride back was a silent torment. The rattle of the wagon wheels was the only sound. Eli's back was a rigid wall of anger. His knuckles were white on the reins. When they reached the homestead, he jumped down and began unhitching the mules, his movements violent and jerky. Lila, shaking with a mixture of fear and her own rising anger, climbed down. You had no right, she cried, her voice tearing. Eli turned on her. No right. I told you not to go. I told you what this place was, what he was. What were you thinking? I was thinking I am not your prisoner, she threw back at him. All her fear, all her shame, turning to heat. I was thinking I will not be a burden, hiding in a room while you protect me. I am tired of being protected. I am tired of being hidden away like I am something to be ashamed of. This ain't about shame, he roared, slamming his hand against the side of the wagon. The mules shied. This is about you being alive. Do you know what they were saying in town? What they've been saying ever since Pike spread his poison. Do you think that was a game? They were just words. Words, he laughed, a harsh, broken sound. He advanced on her, and for a second, she thought he might hit her. He stopped, his face contorted. Words are just the start. Words are what get people killed. He kicked the wagon wheel, a single, violent act. And then he broke. He sagged against the wagon, his head dropping. It was words, he whispered, his voice cracking. Just Just words. About a fence line. About a stolen calf. Lila stopped, her anger vanishing, replaced by a cold dread. Eli was not looking at her. He was looking at the past. My brother, Silas, he was young, hot-headed, but I was worse. I was the one with the temper. This neighbor of ours, Mr. Harding, he said Silas was a thief, and I couldn't let it go. I went for him. I told him I'd kill him. He was shaking, not with anger, with grief. We met on the road. Harding had his sons. I had my rifle. Silas came with me to talk me down. Harding said the words again, called my brother a thief. And I snapped. I went for my gun. I was going to shoot him, right there. He paused, swallowing hard. But Silas, my little brother, he stepped in front of me. He was trying to stop me, not Harding, me. He was saying my name. The wind sighed through the eaves of the cabin. Harding thought Silas was going for a gun. He shot Silas. Eli's voice was dead. He died right there, in the dust. My fault, because of my temper, because I couldn't let a few damned words go. He finally looked at her, his eyes hollowed out by a sorrow so deep she could not fathom it. I came here to be quiet. I came here so there would be no one to fight, no one left for me to hurt. I am trying to live quiet. Lila, I am trying so hard. And you walk right back into the town I ran from, and you make me remember the man I am. They stood in the harsh afternoon light, the silence between them now filled with his truth. He had not just saved her. They were saving each other. She looked at him, really looked at him. The fire was gone, leaving only the ashes, and she saw the cut on his cheek from the tall man's blow, a thin, red line, beaded with blood, already gathering dust. Eli, she said, her voice soft. He didn't move. She took his hand. It was limp, cold. She led him into the cabin, like a child. He sat at the table, his shoulders slumped. The kettle she had used for her baking was still on the stove, water still in the reservoir. She stoked the fire, just enough to warm it. She tore a strip from one of her clean petticoats, a sacrifice, and dipped it in the warm water. She stood in front of him. He was staring at the table, at the grain of the wood. Look at me, she said. He slowly raised his head. His eyes met hers. They were full of shame. She gently, so gently, dabbed at the cut on his cheek. He flinched, not from pain, but from the touch. It's all right, she whispered. He reached up, his rough, calloused hand covering hers, pressing the warm, wet cloth to his own face. He closed his eyes. He was trembling. He held her hand there, against his skin, not letting go. The cabin was silent, but it was a new silence. It was magnetic. She could feel the heat from his skin, the tremor in his fingers. She was standing between his knees, his hand holding hers to his face. He smelled of sweat and dust and a deep, masculine sorrow. She leaned down. He opened his eyes. He saw her coming. He pulled back, just an inch, his voice a broken rasp. Lila, no, don't, I'm not, I ain't a good man. You are, she whispered. She leaned closer, her lips almost brushing his. I want to feel clean, she said. The confession ripped from her own soul. I want to feel wanted. She kissed him. It was soft. It was the brushing of lips. A question. It was gentle. And it was emotionally charged with everything they had not said for weeks. He tasted of salt. He froze. He was a statue, a man braced for a blow. She started to pull back, shame washing over her. Then his hand left hers. It moved to her waist, and he kissed her back. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of starvation. It was a kiss of a man drowning. And she was his first breath of air. His other hand came up, tangling in her hair, holding her head as if she might escape. He pulled her closer, his lips desperate, and she met his hunger with her own. It was a kiss of shared grief, of raw loneliness, of a desperate human need. In the corner, the kettle, forgotten, began to whistle. It started as a low hiss, then rose to a high, thin, piercing shriek. The sound shattered the moment. They sprang apart. breathing hard. Lila's face was flushed, her lips swollen. Eli stared at her, his eyes wide, a mixture of terror and want. The kettle screamed. Lila lunged for it, grabbing it with the rag, her hands fumbling. She poured 2 cups of water she didn't want. They did not speak, not a word. They ate a cold supper of leftover beans. The air was electric. They avoided each other's eyes. When the time came, Lila stood. "Good night, Eli." "Night, Lila," he mumbled to his plate. She went to her room. She closed the door. She put her hand on the wooden bolt. She heard him rise, heard the scrape of his chair. She heard him walk toward his own bed. She took her hand off the bolt. She left the door open, just a crack, a sliver. But it was open. She lay on her cot, her heart hammering so hard it shook the frame. She heard him pace. 1 set of footsteps, then a pause. Then he walked back. She heard him stop, right outside her door. She held her breath. She could feel him there. Eli stood in the darkness, staring at the open door. He could see the dark shape of her on the cot. He could smell the cinnamon from the pies still lingering in the air. He wanted to go in. He wanted to lie beside her. He wanted to feel her hand in his, but he thought of Silas. He thought of the man on the saloon porch. He thought of the violence in his own hands. He was trembling. He was afraid. Not of her. He was terrified of himself. He rested his forehead against the doorframe, his eyes closed, his knuckles white. He could not. He would not. He would not be the man who hurt her. He turned and walked to his own cold bed on the far side of the room. The next morning, the fragile, terrifying spell was broken by the sound of a horse. It was not a gallop. It was a steady, official trot. Eli, who was already by the corral, looked up. "Sheriff." Sheriff Brody rode in. He was an older man, his face etched with the weariness of a man who enforced the peace between impossible forces. He did not dismount. "Eli." He nodded. He saw Lila, who had come to the cabin door, her shawl pulled tight. "Ma'am." "What is it?" "Sheriff?" Eli asked, his hand resting on the corral fence. "I'm here officially." "Eli," Brody said, looking uncomfortable. "Jonathan Pike filed a formal complaint. He's claiming this woman," he nodded at Lila, "is squatting on your land, and he cited territorial statutes on vagrancy and immoral cohabitation." "We are not," Lila began, her face pale. "It doesn't matter what you are, ma'am." The sheriff cut her off, not unkindly. "It matters what he says you are. And he owns the bank, the freight office, and half the grazing land in this valley. The law has to listen." "You're going to arrest her?" Eli said, his voice dangerously low. "I don't want to. Eli, you know I don't. I told him he was being a bastard. But he's right. On the letter of the law. She ain't your kin. She has no title here. He's demanding I remove her. And if she won't go, then I have to arrest her for vagrancy, and you for harboring her." Brody sighed, taking off his hat and wiping his brow. "I bought you time. I told him I'd handle it. He's giving you 2 days. In 2 days, she has to be gone. Not from town, just from here, from your land. If she's still here on Friday, Eli, I'm coming back with a wagon. I'm sorry. It's the best I can do." The sheriff turned his horse and rode away, leaving the 2 of them standing in the dust. The silence that followed was awful. The ultimatum hung in the air. 2 days. Eli was pacing. He was trapped. He looked at the cabin, at his small, quiet life. He looked at Lila. She was staring at the ground, defeated. He stopped. He had run from his past. He had run from his temper. He had run from his own heart. He was done running. "Marry me," he said. Lila's head snapped up. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, his voice flat, practical. "It's the only way. He can't have a wife arrested for squatting on her husband's land. The cohabitation charge. It's gone. It's a piece of paper. It's a name. It'll keep you safe." He was offering her his name, his protection. He was offering her the very thing she had been denied. But Lila looked at his face. He was not looking at her with the desperate hunger of the night before. He was not looking at her with love. He was looking at her like a problem, a puzzle he had to solve. The kiss had not been a beginning. It had been a mistake. "No," she said. "Lila, be reasonable. It's the only way." "No!" Her voice was stronger now, colder. "Why not?" he demanded, frustration rising. "It's just a name." "Because I will not," she cried, the words torn from her. "I came here on a piece of paper to be a bride. I will not be forced into it again. I will not marry a man because he pities me. I will not be your good deed. Eli, I will not be your penance for Silas." "It ain't pity," he yelled. "What is it, then?" she shot back, her eyes blazing with unshed tears. "Is it love? Was that love? Last night, when you stood outside my door and walked away? No. It's guilt. It's responsibility. And I will not build a life on your guilt. I have enough of my own." She turned her back on him, her shoulders rigid. "The sheriff gave me 2 days. I don't need them. I'll be gone by morning." She walked into the cabin. She walked into her small room. Eli stood, helpless, in the yard. He heard the sound of her door closing. And then he heard the solid, final, heartbreaking thud of the wooden bolt sliding into place. Eli did not sleep. He sat at the table in the dark, the bottle of whiskey in front of him, untouched. He stared at the closed, bolted door of her room. The thud of that bolt sliding into place had been louder than a gunshot. It was the sound of an ending. He had been a fool. He had seen the legal trap laid by Pike and had tried to meet it with a legal solution. A piece of paper. A name. He had offered her a contract, just as Pike had. He had offered her everything except the one thing she needed to hear. He had not offered her his heart. He had stood outside her door, trembling with a desire and fear so profound he couldn't name it, and he had walked away. He had proven her right. He was just another man who would leave her, if not by horse, then by an emotional retreat. He sat until the first, sick, gray light of dawn seeped through the cracks in the shutters. He heard a rustle, a small cough, then the sound that made his stomach clench, the shing of the wooden bolt being drawn back. He stood, his legs stiff. The door opened. Lila Mae Carter stood in the doorway, dressed in the same dark brown traveling suit she had arrived in. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen and red, but her jaw was set. She had washed her face, but there was no hiding the night she had spent. Beside her, by the cabin door, sat her battered trunk. She was packed and ready. "Lila," he said. His voice was a raw croak. "The sun is rising," she said, her voice flat, devoid of all the warmth he had come to know. She would not look at him. "I'll be off your land before the sheriff is at his desk. You won't have any more trouble from me." She reached for the handle of the trunk. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice sharp. "That is not your concern. I'll walk to town. I'll find Agnes. I'll work for her, or I'll catch the next train. I don't care, but I am not your responsibility." He stepped in front of the door, blocking her path. "The hell you're not." She finally looked at him, her eyes flashing with a cold, spent anger. "Move, Eli, please. Don't make this harder than it is. You are free. Pike wins. It's over. No, Eli, I will not be your burden. I will not be your charity case." "Was that what last night was?" he demanded, his voice rising, the hurt breaking through. "Was that charity? When I told you about Silas, that kiss, was that pity?" "No," she whispered, her resolve cracking. "And my offer," he said, stepping closer. "The one I was a damn fool to make. It wasn't pity, Lila. It was practical. It was stupid. It was me, being a coward, offering you a piece of paper when I should have been offering you me." He was standing in front of her now, the trunk at their feet. He was so close she could feel the heat rolling off him, the exhaustion, the desperation. "Don't go," he said. "You gave me no reason to stay," she whispered, a tear escaping, tracking down her pale cheek. "You gave me a contract, a business arrangement." Then I'm giving you a reason now. He was pleading. He, who had not pleaded for anything in 5 years. Forget the sheriff. Forget Pike. Forget the marriage. Just stay. Stay here. Why? She cried, the word tearing out of her. Why, Eli? So you can fight my battles until you hate me for it? So you can look at me every day and be reminded of the man you're trying not to be? Why? Because, he said, his voice dropping, his own eyes burning. Because if you walk out that door, this place, it's just a cabin again. It's just dirt and wood. It's not a home. It goes back to being empty. And I don't want to be alone anymore. Lila, it ain't about obligation. I'm asking you to stay because I don't want to lose you. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. She sagged, the rigid posture that had held her together dissolving. The tears came, not the silent, sorrowful weeping of the night before, but a storm of grief and fear and a desperate, fragile hope. I want to, she wept into her hands. I want to stay. I've never wanted anything more. Then stay. I can't, she sobbed, looking up at him, her face naked with her terror. I am so scared. Don't you see? I am scared of this. I am scared of you. I am scared of needing, of wanting to stay. Every man I have ever trusted, Eli, every single one, every man I've trusted has left me broken. Every man I have ever needed has left me ruined. His heart, which he thought had died with Silas, cracked wide open. He saw it all. Her past, her present, the terror. He reached out, slowly, and took her hand. Her fingers were ice cold. He wrapped his rough, warm hands around hers. He held her. Then I'll be the first to stay, he said. The words were a vow, spoken soft and low, in the gray light of dawn. She looked at him, her breath catching. She searched his face, his steady gray eyes, and saw no lie. She saw no pity. She saw only a man who was just as broken as she was, and who was not running. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her mouth, then rising to her eyes, asking a silent question. She gave a small, trembling nod. The kiss was not like the one in the kitchen, born of heat and desperation. This was a kiss of profound longing, of agonizing restraint. It was a promise before it was a passion. It was the taste of salt from her tears, and the taste of coffee and whiskey from his sleepless night. It was gentle. It was a question, she answered. Her hand, the one he was not holding, came up to his stubbled cheek. She held him. She kissed him back, and the restraint shattered. The longing spilled over, becoming something deeper, something fierce. His other hand went to her waist, pulling her against him, off her feet, until she was flush against the solid wall of his chest. His hand tangled in her loose hair, his fingers gripping, as if to anchor himself. It was a kiss that spoke of lonely nights, of deep, unvoiced hungers, of two solitudes colliding. It was a kiss that said, "You are here. You are real." He broke from her mouth, his lips moving to her cheek, her temple, her closed eyelid, his breath hot and ragged. "Lila," he murmured, his voice thick. "Eli," she breathed, her hands clutching his shirt. He looked at her, his eyes dark. "I ain't like them," he said, a raw promise. "I will not break you." She nodded, her eyes full. She trusted him. In this one fragile moment, she trusted him with everything. He lifted her. He carried her. He did not take her to her small, cold room. He carried her past the bolted door, to his own bed in the corner of the cabin, the bed that had been empty for 5 long years. He laid her down on the patchwork quilt, and the morning light, now warm and golden, spilled over them. He did not rush. This was not a taking. It was a discovery. His rough hands, the hands of a farmer and a fighter, were impossibly gentle. He unfastened the tiny buttons of her traveling suit, one by one, his fingers trembling. He was unpeeling the layers of her protection. Her pain. She watched him, her heart hammering. When he was done, she reached for him, her own unsteady fingers working the buttons of his shirt. She was unfastening his armor, the layers of guilt and solitude he had worn for so long. They made love for the first time as the sun climbed the sky. It was not a fire. It was not the storm. It was a slow, tender unfolding. It was hesitant, and then it was sure. It was two people, scarred and wary, finding a place of absolute safety. It was his desperate, gentle attempt to prove he would stay, and her terrifying, brave decision to let him. Every touch was a question. Every slow, deep kiss was an answer. It was a healing. In the stillness after, they lay tangled in the quilt, the cabin silent save for the crackle of the dying fire and the sound of their breathing. The sun was high, streaming through the window he had boarded up and then uncovered. She was tucked against his side, her head on his chest, her hand splayed over his heart. It beat, slow and steady, under her palm. This, she thought, was the most dangerous moment. The silence after the vulnerability. She had given him her body. Now, if she was to stay, she had to give him the rest. "Eli?" she whispered to his skin. "I'm here," he murmured, his lips brushing the top of her hair. "I ain't going nowhere." "My name," she said, her voice small. "It isn't Lila Mae Carter." He went very still, but his arm, the one around her, tightened, holding her fast. He waited. "My father. His name was Llewellyn. I buried it, and the Carter I took from a character in a book. It seemed respectable." She took a shaky breath. This was the part that could break everything. "You asked me why I left St. Louis. I told you a story about a factory. It was true, but it wasn't the first truth." She felt his chest rise and fall. He said nothing. "I was 16. My father, he was a good man. Once, but the drink, it took him. It took everything. He had debts, to a woman in the city." She was staring at the log beams of the ceiling, her voice hollow, reciting a story she had tried to burn. "He told me I was going to work for her. He said she was a seamstress. He left me on her doorstep. He took her money, and he sold me." Eli's entire body went rigid. A low, terrible sound vibrated in his chest, a growl of such profound rage it frightened her. "Eli, he what?" The words were ripped from him. "It wasn't a dress shop," she continued, the words coming faster now, tumbling out, a confession in the dark. "It was a brothel, for rich men, by the river." She was shaking now, the memory, always just beneath the surface, claiming her. "I was there for 3 years. I learned to be quiet. I learned to be small. I learned to go away, to be a ghost." She told him about the man who liked to frighten her, the man who held her under the river water, who told her he was washing her clean. "That night, I ran. He thought he'd killed me. But I ran. I just ran. I didn't stop for 2 days. I stole some clothes. I found the factory. I changed my name. I saved every dollar, every cent. I thought if I came west, if I came to Wyoming, it would be clean. I thought I could be new. I thought I could wash it all away," she finished, breathless. The silence in the cabin was a crushing weight. She had told him. She had given him the one, final, ugly truth. She waited for the disgust. She waited for him to recoil, to pull his arm away, to call her what Pike had called her. He didn't move. He was shaking. His whole body was trembling with a rage she had only seen him direct at Pike's men, but it was not for her. He rolled, moving her, pulling her on top of him so she had no choice but to look him in the face. His eyes were full of a devastating, terrible pain, and of a fury that was not at her. It was at the world. He was devastated, but she saw, with a clarity that stunned her. He was not repelled. He held her face between his two, rough hands. "You ain't what they made you," he said, his voice raw, thick with emotion. "Eli, I'm so—" "No, you listen to me." His thumbs wiped the tears from her cheeks. "You are not what your father sold. You are not what those men, what they used. You are the woman who survived. You are the woman who ran. You are the woman who stood on that platform, terrified, and didn't crumble. You are the woman who baked pies and faced down those bastards in town. You are what you choose now." He pulled her down to him. And you chose to live. You chose to be here. You chose me. He held her, tight, rocking her, his face buried in her hair. And I choose you. All of you. Do you hear me? Lila? All of it. She held on to him, and for the first time since she was 16 years old, she let go. She wept, not for what she had lost, but for what, against all odds, she had just found. Lila woke the next morning to the smell of coffee and bacon. She woke alone in the big, warm bed, the quilt piled around her. For a moment, a cold, familiar panic seized her. He was gone. It had been a dream. Then she heard it, a low, tuneless humming. She sat up, wrapping the quilt around her shoulders. Her body was sore, but it was a good soreness, a living soreness. She padded, barefoot, to the edge of the main room. Eli was at the stove, his back to her. He was wearing his trousers, his feet bare, his suspenders hanging loose. He was cooking, he was humming. He turned, a plate in his hand, and saw her. He stopped. A slow, warm, unpracticed smile spread across his face. It was the first time she had ever truly seen him smile. It lit his gray eyes, chasing the shadows. "Mornin'," he said, his voice soft. She looked at the table. It was set, not with one plate, as it had always been, but with two plates, 2 forks, 2 tin cups of coffee. It was the smallest, most ordinary thing. A man making breakfast, an extra plate. But to her, it was everything. It was a future. It was a home. She burst into tears. Not the hard, racking sobs of her past, but quiet, soft, healing tears. Eli's smile vanished, replaced by pure panic. He dropped the plate on the stove and was at her side in an instant. "What is it? Are you hurt? Did I? Lila, what's wrong?" She laughed, a watery, broken sound, and threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his warm chest. "No," she whispered, her voice muffled. It's just, no one has ever made me breakfast before." He went still. Then his arms, the strong, solid arms that had held her all night, wrapped around her, holding her up. He rested his chin on the top of her head. He, too, was shaking. Life on the homestead shifted. The sheriff's deadline of Friday passed. He never came. The cabin was no longer 2 separate, lonely worlds. It was one. He taught her how to sight his rifle. She taught him how to bake bread that wasn't as hard as a brick. They ate together. They worked together. They slept together. The small cot in her old room was piled with blankets. Forgotten. One afternoon, he found her at the table, a piece of brown wrapping paper smoothed out, a stub of a pencil in her hand. She was trying to write, her brow furrowed in concentration. The table was too low, the wood too rough. He watched her for a long time. The next day, he was outside, the sound of sawing and hammering filling the air. He was working with scrap wood, pieces of an old, broken-down feed trough. That evening, he brought it in. It was a small, simple desk. It was not pretty. The wood was different colors, and the legs were slightly uneven. But he had sanded the top smooth. It was sturdy. It was solid. She stood, speechless, and ran her hand over the smooth, flat surface. "It ain't much," he mumbled, rubbing the back of his neck, embarrassed. "But I figured, a woman who writes, she needs a proper place to do it." She kissed him, a long, sweet kiss that tasted of gratitude. That night, she sat at her desk. She began to write. Not to send, not to anyone. She wrote to find her voice. She wrote about the hum of the factory, the smell of the river. She wrote about the wind. She did not write about her past. Not yet, but she was. Letter by letter, writing her future. The peace, hard won, did not last. The world outside their small patch of land had not forgotten them. They were washing dishes one night, the lantern casting a warm, yellow glow. Lila was washing, Eli drying, a comfortable, domestic silence. Crash, the sound of shattering glass, violent and sudden. A rock, the size of a man's fist, flew through the window, skidded across the floor, and came to rest by the hearth, Before the rock stopped rolling, Eli had thrown Lila to the floor and had the rifle from the rack. He moved to the side of the broken window, using the wall as cover, his body shielding her. "Who's there?" he roared into the blackness. "Show yourself." There was no answer, only the sound of a horse, already at a full gallop, fading into the distance. He waited, the rifle steady, for 5 full minutes. Nothing. He finally lit another lantern, his face a mask of cold granite. He looked at Lila, who was trembling, but unharmed. He went to the rock. There was a piece of dirty paper tied to it with twine. He unrolled it. The letters were crude, written in charcoal. "Whore keeper." Lila saw the old, familiar rage return to his face, the tightening of his jaw, the white in his knuckles as he held the rifle. The man he was trying to bury was right there, on the surface. She stood up and walked to him. She gently took the paper from his hand. "It's just a rock, Eli," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's just words." He looked at her, his breathing heavy. Last time, it was words. Then it was a rock. Then it was Silas. "No," she said, putting her hand on his chest, over his heart. "It was you and Silas against them. This is you and me. We stand together." He put his hand over hers, his eyes never leaving her face. The next day, Agnes Miller rode in. She did not wave. She rode her horse hard, right to the cabin, her face grim. "Agnes," Lila said, running out to meet her. "What is it? Is your boy sick?" "No, child. He's fine. It's not that." Agnes dismounted, her movements hurried. "Eli, you get out here." Eli came from the barn, a hammer in his hand. "Agnes, what's wrong?" "It's Pike," Agnes said, twisting the strap of her reticule. "He's a snake, that one. He's not a man who likes to be punched. He's not a man who likes to lose. He's been in Cheyenne." "Cheyenne? What for?" Eli asked. "He was talking to the federal marshals," Agnes said, her voice dropping. "He's filing a new complaint. Oh, child. He's going to have you arrested." "Arrested?" Lila's blood ran cold. "For what? Vagrancy? Squatting? Eli and I are—" "It's worse," Agnes said, her eyes full of pity. "He's using a new law, something called the Mann Act. He's accusing you of crossing state lines for immoral purposes. He's going to tell them he rejected you because he knew you were a professional woman. He's going to claim that Eli isn't your protector. He's going to claim he's your procurer, that this cabin is a brothel." The hammer dropped from Eli's hand. Lila swayed, her nightmare come to life. Pike, without knowing it, had struck her with the one lie that felt exactly like the truth. Her past, her hidden, buried past, was coming to claim her. "He can't," Lila whispered, grabbing the cabin wall for support. "He can't prove that. It's a lie." "He doesn't have to prove it, child," Agnes said, her voice breaking. "He just has to say it. He's Jonathan Pike. He'll get a marshal in his pocket, and they'll drag you to a court in Cheyenne. He's not trying to win, don't you see? He's trying to ruin you. He's trying to make you run." Lila looked at Eli. This was it. This was the fight he couldn't win. This was not a fist fight. This was his land, his name, his life. She had brought this on him. This was the moment he would finally realize she was poison. Eli Thatcher stood still. He looked at the ground where the hammer lay. He looked at his hands. He looked at Agnes, her face full of fear. Then he looked at Lila. He was not the man who had hidden from his past. He was not the man who had sat alone in the dark. He was the man who had built a desk. He was the man who had set 2 plates. He walked past Agnes. He walked right to Lila, who was trembling, her back against the cabin wall. He put his hands on her shoulders. "He thinks we'll run," Eli said. His voice was not angry. It was quiet. It was cold. It was the calmest she had ever heard him. "Eli, he will destroy you," she whispered, the tears finally coming. "He will take this land. He will take everything. All because of me." "This ain't just land," Eli said. "And it ain't because of you. It's for you. It's for us. This is our home." He leaned in and kissed her forehead. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of alliance. It was a brand. It was a promise. He looked her in the eyes, his own gray eyes as clear and steady as the high plains. We stand together now. The ride into Clearwater was not a ride of rage. It was a ride of cold, hard purpose. Eli Thatcher, the man who had hidden from his own temper for 5 years, now wore it like a tool. He had left Lila at the cabin, her face pale with terror. He had seen the look in her eyes, the one that said, "Please don't go," but he had also seen her stand and take his hand, the silent promise of, "We stand together." He was not riding to start a fight. He was riding to finish one. He left his horse at the livery, not in a hurry, his movements deliberate. He did not go to the saloon. He went to the place where Pike conducted his business, the freight office. Jonathan Pike was at his desk, visible through the large front window. A ledger open before him. He was a king at his court. Eli walked in. The clerk at the front counter, a young man with a nervous twitch, looked up. "Can I help you, Mr. Thatcher?" "I am here for him," Eli said, his voice flat. He walked past the counter and stood in front of Pike's desk. Pike looked up, annoyance flashing in his cold eyes, quickly replaced by a smug, cruel smile. "Thatcher, come to beg? Or perhaps to offer me payment for the trouble your whore has caused?" "The accusations," Eli said, his voice quiet, drawing the full attention of the room. "The ones you sent to the marshals in Cheyenne, you will retract them. You will send a wire, today, telling them you were mistaken." Pike laughed. It was a genuine laugh, full of disbelief. He leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers over his fine waistcoat. "You are in no position to demand anything. You are a homesteader, a farmer. I am the man who owns this valley. And you," he leaned forward, his voice dropping, "are a fool. You are defending damaged property. Everyone in this territory knows she's used goods. You've just been the last to pay." Eli did not move. He did not breathe. He heard the words, the same ones that had been written on the rock. He thought of Lila, of Ilara, of the girl she had been. He thought of her in the jailhouse, telling her story. No, that was tomorrow. Today, he was here. He was in the freight office, and the words hung in the air. This was not the same man who had killed his brother. This was not a blind rage. It was a cold, clear, righteous fury. He punched him. It was not a wild swing. It was a deliberate, powerful, short-armed blow. Eli put his whole body, his whole grief, his whole love for the woman in the cabin, into that one punch. The sound was a wet, solid crack. Pike's chair flew backward, and he crumpled to the floor, his desk lamp crashing down. The clerk shrieked. Eli stood over Pike, his fist bleeding, his chest heaving. Pike was groaning, blood pouring from his nose. "The name is Ilara," Eli said to the man on the floor. "Eli, that's enough." Sheriff Brody was in the doorway, his gun drawn but not pointed. He had been expecting this. The whole town had... "I won't have this. Eli," Brody said, his voice full of weariness. "You can't just walk into a man's office and strike him." "I don't care what he said." "He knows what he said," Eli replied, not taking his eyes off Pike. "And I know the law," Brody snapped. "You're under arrest for assault." Eli did not resist. He raised his hands, slowly, and let the sheriff take his pistol. He had done what he came to do. He had answered the words with a clear, sharp, undeniable fact. He allowed Brody to march him across the street to the jail, leaving Pike bleeding on his own floor. Agnes Miller did not wait. She had seen Eli ride into town. She had seen his face. She had saddled her own horse, knowing what was to come, and had followed, keeping her distance. When she saw the sheriff lead Eli to the jail, she turned her horse and rode like the wind, not to town, but to the homestead. Lila was scrubbing the floor when Agnes burst in, breathless. "He's done it. Child. He's in jail. Brody's got him. Pike is pressing charges." Lila's heart stopped. She dropped the rag, her hands numb. He was gone. He had fought for her, and he had been taken. No, Agnes said, grabbing her shoulders. This is not the time to weep. This is the time to fight. You are not the woman he left on that platform. You are the woman he is in jail for. Now, you get in my wagon. We are going to town, and we are going to end this. Lila did not even change. She ran to the wagon, her skirt still damp, her hands raw. The ride back was a blur of dust and terror. She stumbled into the small jailhouse. It was a single room, an office for Brody, with 2 cells lining the back wall. Eli was in one, standing, his hands gripping the bars. He was not looking down. He was watching the door, waiting for her. Eli, she breathed. He was safe. He was alive. I'm sorry. Lila, he said, his voice rough. No, she whispered, walking to the bars. He had to be answered. I know. She reached through the bars, her fingers finding his. Well, this is a touching reunion. Lila turned. Jonathan Pike was sitting in a chair by Brody's desk. His face was a mess. His nose was swollen to twice its size, packed with cotton, and his lip was split. A silk handkerchief in his hand was stained with blood. He looked ruined, and he looked furious. Sheriff, Pike's voice was a nasal whine. I want this man held. I am pressing full charges, and I want her. He pointed at Lila. Held as well. She is a vagrant, an accomplice. The marshals will be here tomorrow, and I will see them both in chains. Sheriff Brody rubbed the back of his neck, his face a map of misery. Lila, I don't know what I can do. He's right, on the assault and the complaint from Cheyenne. The jailhouse door flew open again, crashing against the wall. Sheriff Brody, you will do no such thing. It was Agnes Miller, and she was not alone. Behind her stood Mrs. Harker, the mercantile owner, her arms crossed, her face a thundercloud. And behind her, 2 other women from the valley, the wives of small ranchers, both of whom looked terrified but resolute. Pike stood up, his arrogance returning. What is this, a knitting circle? Get these women out of here. Sheriff, this is official business. This is official business. Mr. Pike, Agnes snapped, stepping forward. We are here as witnesses to your character. Sheriff, Agnes said, turning to Brody. You cannot listen to this man. You are listening to a snake, and you are calling it a man. He has been a plague on this valley for 10 years. He's not a pillar of the community. He's a bully. That is slander, Pike roared. Is it? Mrs. Harker stepped forward, her voice surprisingly steady. Sheriff, my husband has been afraid to speak. Pike owes us. He owes us over $500, but he doesn't pay. He pays his men in scrip, in little pieces of paper, and forces them to buy from his own store, at prices that are double what I charge. He's starving them. It's not just wrong. Sheriff, it's theft. It's slavery. By another name. My brother, Thomas, one of the other women said, her voice trembling. He worked for Pike. He was hurt by one of Pike's stallions, a mean brute. Pike said Thomas was careless, and he threw him out, in the middle of winter, with no pay. He nearly died. Pike is not a good man. The room was still. The public opinion, which had always whispered in shadows, had just found its voice. Brody looked from the women to Pike, his eyes narrowing. This was no longer a simple assault. This was a reckoning. Pike, cornered, turned his fury on the one person he thought he could still break. This is a conspiracy. Lies. All of it. This is because of her. She has poisoned this town. She is a harlot, a liar. She is the one who should be in jail. I am the injured party here, and the law says she must be removed. All eyes in the small, hot room turned to Lila. She was the one, the cause, the center of the storm. She stood between her past and her future. Behind her was Eli, a man in a cage, who had fought for her. In front of her was Pike, a man who represented every man who had ever hurt her. She was pale, and she was trembling. Eli gripped the bars. Lila, Ilara, you don't have to say anything. She held up a hand. He stopped. She took a single, shuddering breath. The woman who had been sold, the girl who had been drowned, The traveler who had been abandoned. She was gone. Lila Mae Carter stepped forward, into the center of the room. She was not looking at Pike. She was not looking at the women. She was looking directly at Sheriff Brody, as the law. "Sheriff Brody," she said. Her voice was not loud. It was low, and it was clear, and it cut through every other sound. "Mr. Pike is right about one thing. I was brought here under a lie, but the lie was not mine." She took a breath. "My name is not Lila Mae Carter. It is Ilara Llewellyn." Eli's heart clenched. He watched her, his soul in his eyes. "I took a new name because my old one was soiled. Not by my actions, but by the actions of men. By a father who sold me into servitude. By men who believed that because I was poor, I was also their property." She was not crying. Her voice was steady. A hot, clear fire. She was not asking for pity. She was demanding justice. "I came to Wyoming to be clean. I came here to be free, to start a new life where a woman's past did not determine her future. I am not a harlot. I am not a whore. I am a woman who has been abused. I am a woman who has been beaten and sold and discarded, and I am tired of it. I am tired of running." She finally turned, her gaze locking with Jonathan Pike's. He flinched, as if she had struck him. "You call me used goods. You left me on that platform with $2 because you said I was too plain and too quiet. You did not see a human being. You saw livestock that did not meet your standards. And now, because I have dared to find a place of safety, because a good man has shown me a kindness I have never known, you seek to destroy me with the only weapon you have left. You seek to ruin me with my own shame." She turned back to the sheriff. "I am not ashamed anymore. I am done. I am a victim of abuse, Sheriff Brody, and I am claiming my right, under God and the law, to live here with dignity. To live in peace. Mr. Pike is not just pressing charges for an assault. He is continuing the abuse that has followed me my entire life, and I am asking you, as the law, to make it stop." The silence that followed was absolute. Eli was gripping the bars, his knuckles white, his face a mask of such agonizing pride, such profound love, it was a wound. Agnes was weeping, her hand over her mouth. "Mrs." Harker was nodding, her arms crossed. Pike was ashen. He had been beaten. He had come with a legal charge, and she had met him with a moral truth. Sheriff Brody, a man who had seen much, looked at Ilara. He saw her, truly saw her. For the first time, he nodded. "Once." He walked to Eli's cell. He took a key from his belt and unlocked the door. "Sheriff, this is an outrage," Pike sputtered. Finding his voice, "You cannot do this! I am the victim!" The cell door swung open. Eli stepped out, and in 2 strides, he was at Ilara's side. He did not touch her. He just stood with her, a solid wall. "The charges against you, Eli, are dropped," Brody said, his voice flat. "It seems to me, in light of this testimony, this was a clear matter of provocation. A man has a right to defend his home. This is a conspiracy." "No, Mr. Pike," Brody said, his voice turning to ice. He turned on Pike. "An outrage is what these women are claiming. As of this moment, I am opening a formal investigation into the labor practices at the Circle P. I'll be having a long talk with every man on your payroll, past and present. I'm sure Mrs. Harker will be happy to show me your ledger." Mrs. Harker smiled. It was not a nice smile. "And as for those federal marshals," Brody continued, "I'll be sending my own wire to Cheyenne. Right now, I'll be telling them this complaint under the Mann Act is a malicious, false, and personal vendetta. I doubt they'll be in any hurry to ride out on your behalf." Brody stepped close to Pike until they were almost touching. "You have been the king of this valley for a long time, but kings can fall. You will back down. You will leave these people." He gestured to Eli and Ilara. "Alone, or I will, by God, spend every waking hour and every resource I have to tear you down, piece by legal piece. Do you understand me?" Pike looked at Brody. He looked at the women, who were no longer afraid of him. He looked at Eli and Alara, standing together. He was beaten. He snatched his hat, his face purple, and without a word, he stormed out of the jailhouse. Agnes and the women rushed to Alara, touching her arm, her shoulder. "Well done, child." "God bless you." Eli just took her hand. It was trembling, but it was warm. He led her out of the jail, into the sunlight. They walked to the wagon, climbed in, and rode home, the vast, silent prairie welcoming them. They returned to the cabin. The broken window was still boarded. The rock Pike's man had thrown was still on the hearth. The threat was gone, but the fear lingered. Pike was a snake in the grass, and they had stepped on him. He would not forget. Alara sat at the table, her body finally succumbing to the shakes. Eli did not sit. He did not rest. He looked at her desk, at the small, cramped room she had been given. He picked up the rock from the hearth, held it in his hand for a long moment, and then he went outside, a new, clear purpose in his eyes. He picked up his hammer, his saw. He went to the small pile of lumber he had saved. Lila watched him from the doorway. He was not fixing the window. He was measuring. He was marking the side of the cabin. Next to her old room, he was starting a new foundation. She went out, the breeze catching her hair. "Eli, what are you doing? We should rest." He did not stop. The thwack of the hammer was a steady, defiant beat. "Rest comes after. This cabin, it's too small." "It was built for one, not for two." He was framing a wall, a new room. I don't understand," she said. He stopped, turning to her, the hammer in his hand. "You need a space, Alara, a real one, with a door, a place to write, a place you can go if I'm chopping wood too loud, or if I'm too much." He looked at the ground. "A place that is yours, that you can bolt, a place you can choose." He was not building a wall to separate them. He was building her a symbol. He was giving her a choice, a physical manifestation of the freedom he had promised, a room of her own, a space he could not enter without her permission. He was offering her the very opposite of the brothel, the very opposite of Pike's ownership. Tears welled in her eyes. She looked at the raw lumber, at the man standing there, sweating in the afternoon sun, building her a sanctuary. She walked to him. She placed her hand over his, the one holding the hammer, stilling it. He looked at her, his eyes full of question. "Eli," she said, her voice so soft, "I don't need a separate room anymore." He searched her face, confused. "Alara, I'm not casting you out. You need a choice." A small, true smile touched her lips. "I know, and I'm choosing." She reached up, touching his rough cheek. "I don't want a wall between us, not ever again." He dropped the hammer. It hit the dirt with a soft thud. He pulled her to him, his face burying in her hair, his whole body shaking with the release of the day, the fight, the fear. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had tried to tear them apart. That night, the fire burned low. They did not eat. The tension of the day, the victory, the lingering fear, all of it funneled into a single, profound need. They went to the bed, their bed. This was not the slow, tender healing of the first time. This was a fire. It was fierce. It was hungry. It was a claim. It was the full, raw vulnerability of two people who had stared down the world and had not flinched. It was a confirmation of the vow they had made in the jailhouse. It was his hands, learning her, his mouth, worshiping her. It was her hands, claiming him, her body, answering his. It was a glorious, passionate, triumphant act. In the darkness, in the aftermath, they lay tangled, their bodies damp, their breathing slowing. He held her, his heart pounding against her back. He kissed her shoulder, her neck. He whispered her name, the one she had given him, the one she had reclaimed. "Alara," he murmured, the name a prayer against her skin. "My Alara." And she, hearing her true name spoken in the dark, not with shame or with pity, but with a fierce, possessive, and gentle love. She finally, fully, let go. The harsh Wyoming wind howled outside. It screamed across the plains, rattling the boards over the broken window, a reminder of the wilderness. But inside the small cabin, it was only a distant sound. They were not cold, they were not afraid. They were safe, anchored in each other's arms. The boards over the broken window were replaced with a new, clear pane of glass that summer, a purchase Eli had made in Cheyenne, along with enough lumber to properly finish the room he had started. It did not become a separate bedroom. It became Alara's. It was her study, her space, with a writing desk, a shelf for her books, and a view of the high plains. The door, he had insisted, had a lock, a shiny, new brass one. She had thanked him, and had never once turned the key. The months bled one into the next, painting the valley with a new palette. The raw, cold spring of their confrontation gave way to a summer of relentless, baking sun. The grasses turned from green to a pale, brittle gold. August was a haze of heat and the smell of hot pine. Then came the sharp, clear gold of autumn, a season of furious work, of cutting and stacking wood until their arms ached, of harvesting the meager, precious garden they had TS. The nights grew teeth, and by November, the world was white again. Time, Alara learned, was measured not in days, but in tasks. The ranch, which had been a place of Eli's solitary penance, began to breathe again. It began to thrive, with the money from her pies, which Mrs. Harker now bought by the dozen. Selling them in the mercantile and giving Alara full credit in coin, they bought a new milk cow. Then another. They bought a sow and 2 gilts. The chicken flock doubled, their eggs a steady, reliable income. Eli, with a partner he trusted. With a life inside his cabin he was desperate to protect. Worked with a focused, quiet energy Alara had never seen. He mended every fence. He re-roofed the barn. He dug a new, deeper well, lined with stone, so Alara would not have to haul water from the old one. He was not just surviving, he was building. He was a man with a future, and it had transformed him. The shadows of Silas were still there. They would always be, but they no longer consumed him. He was no longer a man running from his temper. He was a man channeling his strength. Alara's world, which had once been the 4 walls of a brothel, expanded. Her trips to town, once a source of terror, became a bi-weekly routine. She was no longer Pike's leavings. She was not even Eli's woman. She was Alara. "Mornin', Alara?" "Mister," Harker would call out. "Alara, these pies are a godsend," Sheriff Brody told her, pressing a coin into her hand. "My wife says she's forgotten how to bake her own." The respect was hard won, built on her dignity in the jailhouse and her steady, reliable presence since. She was quiet, she was kind, and she was, they all saw, fiercely loved by Eli Thatcher. That, more than anything, gave her a status the town had to honor. But the land was a hard partner, and it did not care about their small happiness. It tested them. It always tested. The first test came in late June, a rogue frost, a betrayal of the season, descended from the high peaks. The air turned brittle and sharp at 3 a.m. Eli woke, sensing the change, and found Alara already at the new window, staring at the garden, her garden, the one she had tilled and planted and watered. "It'll kill it all," she whispered, her voice sick. He did not pause. He lit 2 lanterns, grabbed every blanket they owned, every spare piece of canvas. For 2 hours, in the freezing, starlit dark, they worked as a team. They drove stakes. They draped the blankets over her tomato plants. They covered the fragile new beans. They built small, smoky fires at the edge of the patch, using damp hay, the smoke a thin, acrid blanket to hold the cold at bay. They worked without speaking, a grim, synchronized dance against the elements. They saved half the garden. They lost the beans. They stood at dawn, shivering, covered in soot, and looked at the damage. Alara's lip trembled. "Half is more than none," Eli said, pulling her against his side, his arm a solid, warm bar. "We'll plant more. We'll build a cold frame next year." She leaned her head on his shoulder. It was not a defeat. It was a partnership. The second test was a sick calf. Their new milk cow, their prize, dropped a beautiful, tiny heifer. And 2 days later, the calf was down, its breath shallow, its body racked with scours. Eli, a pragmatist, a man who knew the hard math of ranching, spent a night with it, then came inside, his face grim. "It's no good. Elara, she's too weak. I'll have to put her down." "No," Elara said. It was not a plea. It was a command. "Elara, it's the way of things. It's cruel to let her suffer. You go cut your wood." "Eli," she said, her jaw set, "I will handle this." For 3 days, she did not sleep. She moved a bale of hay into the barn and sat with the calf. She remembered stories from Agnes. She boiled rice water. She forced warm milk and molasses down the calf's throat, a spoonful at a time. She rubbed its legs. She talked to it. She willed it to live, this small, helpless female thing. Eli watched her from the barn door. He saw a ferocity he had only glimpsed. He saw the woman who had survived her father, the woman who had faced down Pike. He saw a woman who would not, could not, abide another life being discarded as useless. On the 4th morning, he came out with his rifle, his heart heavy, ready to do the hard thing. He found Elara asleep in the hay, her head pillowed on her arm, and standing over her, its legs wobbly but firm, its tail twitching, was the calf, nosing at her hair. Eli stood for a long time, the rifle hanging forgotten in his hand. He went back to the cabin and made her breakfast. The peace they had built was solidified by the fall of their enemy. Agnes, as always, brought the news. She rode in, waving a letter. "He's gone," she cried, before her foot even hit the ground. "He's gone." "Who's gone?" Eli asked, helping her down. "Pike, Jonathan Pike. He's left the territory." The lawsuit that Mrs. Harker's brother-in-law had filed, the one based on the peonage and script theft, had gained traction. With Sheriff Brody's investigation providing official weight, the territorial court had agreed to hear it. Pike, it turned out, was a coward. He was a bully. And when the law, backed by the town's new, clear voice, had finally stared him down, he had folded. "He sold it all," Agnes said, beaming, as they sat in the warm cabin. "The Circle P, the house, the freight contract. Sold it to a cattle consortium from Omaha. He took his money. And he's gone. Slipped out last week, in the middle of the night. Not a word to anyone." Elara and Eli looked at each other over the table. There was no celebration, no gloating. There was just a quiet, profound, and shared exhalation. A shadow had been lifted. A long, dark winter was finally, truly, over. It was in that quiet, that new peace, that Elara found her voice. She had her desk. She had her safety. Now, she found her purpose. She started with Agnes's oldest, a girl of 9 named Sarah, who was bright and quick but could not read her own name. Then came the Harker twins, and 2 shy, sun-browned girls from a homestead 5 miles down the valley. Twice a week, in the room Eli had built for her, Elara held school. She had 1 copy of Pilgrim's Progress, a slate she had bought from the mercantile, and a handful of charcoal sticks. It was enough. She taught them their letters. She taught them to add and subtract. She taught them to write their names, to read the labels on the tins in the store. Eli would come in from his evening chores, the cold clinging to him, and he would stand in the doorway, quiet, just watching. He would see 5 small heads bent over the table, their face furrowed in concentration, and he would see Elara, standing by the slate, her face lit by the lantern, alive, animated, a confidence in her he had never seen before. She was not just a survivor. She was a teacher. She was giving these girls the one thing that had been stolen from her, a choice. The winter deepened. The snows came, piling in drifts as high as the cabin. The world shrank to the circle of their lamplight. They were in the deep heart of the cold, a food shortage behind them, the promise of spring still a distant hope. It was a Tuesday evening, the wind shrieking at the eaves, rattling the storm windows Eli had built. Ilara was at her desk, mending one of Eli's shirts by the light of the fire. The girls had not been able to come for a week. The snow was too deep. Eli was sitting at the main table, his hands, usually so busy. Still, he was not mending a bridle. He was not oiling his rifle. He was just watching her. He had been watching her for an hour, a strange, quiet intensity in his gaze that finally made her look up. "What is it?" she asked, a small smile on her face. "Do I have soot on my nose again?" "No," he said. His voice was low. "You're fine." He stood up from the table, walked to the hearth, and stood, looking down at the fire, his back to her. "Eli, you're frightening me." He turned. His face was not sad or angry. It was open. It was vulnerable. It was the face of the man who had stood outside her door and been too afraid to enter. But it was a fear he had now conquered. In his hand, he was holding a small, carved wooden box. "When Silas died," he said, his voice rough, I put everything away. Not just my temper. I put away wanting. I put away needing. I put away the idea of a future. It was just today. Just getting through. Just being quiet." He looked at her, his gray eyes clear and deep. "And then you came." "And you were so quiet. I thought we were the same. But you're quiet. Ilara, it wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of strength. And you woke me up." He walked to her, not to the desk, but to the chair by the fire. He knelt, not on one knee, in a grand gesture. He just knelt in front of her, so his eyes were level with hers. "I offered you marriage once," he said, his voice thick. "For all the wrong reasons, for protection, for the law. It was a shield." He opened the small, wooden box. Inside, on a bed of dark velvet, was a simple, thin, gold band. It was not new, it was worn, polished by time. "This was my mother's," he said. "It's all I have left of her. I don't want to offer you a shield anymore. Ilara, I don't want to offer you a piece of paper. I want to offer you my name, because it's my name, and I want it to be yours. I want to choose you, every morning. For the rest of my life? And I want to be the man you choose back." He was not asking her to be his wife. He was asking to be her husband. "Ilara Llewellyn," he said, his voice breaking on her true name. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. She put down the shirt she was mending. She reached out, her fingers tracing the scar on his cheek, the one from the fight in town. "Oh, Eli," she whispered. She leaned forward and kissed him, a soft, salty, certain kiss. She pulled back, her hand still on his face. "You never saved me," she said, her voice clear, full of a love that was as strong and sturdy as the man in front of her. "Not from Pike, not from the town. You never saved me." He looked confused, hurt. "You just reminded me I could live again," she finished. You stayed. Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. They did not wait for the spring thaw. They waited for the first melt, in a week of false spring in late March, when a warm wind blew from the south, and the snows pulled back to reveal the muddy, hopeful earth. They were married on the ridge, under the lone, ancient pine tree that overlooked the entire valley. They did not ride in a buggy. They walked, hand in hand, up the hill. Agnes was their witness, her husband, a quiet, smiling man. Standing beside her, there was no preacher. The sky was too big for a small sermon. They just said their vows. Eli went first, his voice unsteady, his words not for God, but for her. He vowed to be her partner, to be her home, to honor her. Ilara went second. Her voice was strong. She did not vow to obey. She vowed to love, to build, and to be his equal. Agnes, crying, pronounced them man and wife. Eli kissed her, a deep, public kiss that tasted of the clean wind and forever. They walked down the hill, Mr. and Mrs. Thatcher, and ate a simple, joyful supper by Agnes's fire. The seasons turned again. The ranch was now, by all accounts, a true home. The new room had been expanded, another small room added on. The nights were cold. It was deep winter. A year, almost, since he had proposed. The wind rattled the windows, a high, lonely shriek that no longer held any terror. Inside, the fire roared in the hearth. The cabin was warm, full of the smell of pine and baking bread. Elara was sitting in a rocking chair, the one Eli had built her, her feet propped up on a stool. She was not mending. She was stitching. The light from the fire lit her face, which was fuller, softer. Her hair was a dark crown. She was stitching a small, yellow blanket. The wool was soft, the stitches tiny and perfect. The door opened, letting in a swirl of cold air and snow. Eli stomped his boots on the mat, his face red from the cold, his coat covered in ice. He had been tending the stock, making sure they were safe from the blizzard. He did not speak. He just shed his heavy coat, his gloves, and walked, his socks silent on the wooden floor, to stand behind her. He looked at the small blanket. He looked at the fire. Then, he leaned down and placed a large, calloused hand on her belly. It was round and full and alive. He held his hand there, waiting. A moment passed. Then, under his palm, he felt it, a faint but definite kick. A slow smile, the one that was only for her, spread across his face. He leaned down further, pressing his cold cheek to her warm one. He kissed her shoulder. Elara leaned back into him, her hand coming up to cover his. The wind howled, a wild, angry thing, trying to get in, but it could not. Not here. Inside, there was warmth. There was laughter, soft and low. There was a hard-won peace. They fell asleep like that, by the fire, tucked in each other's arms, the small, unfinished blanket in her lap. Just before she drifted off, she felt his breath, slow and even. In her hair, she was safe. She was chosen. She was home, she murmured, her voice a sleepy, contented sigh. I finally made it home. Thank you so much for listening to our story. Cowboy saw his neighbor abandon a mail-order bride. He took her in and found love. It means the world to us that you spent this time here. We would love to know where you're listening from. So please, drop a comment and tell us what part of the world you're in. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more tales of hardship, courage, and love on the American frontier. And finally, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of Eli and Elara's journey? Please share your feelings in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you again.